What's the Shroud of Turin?
The Shroud of Turin is believed to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth.
That cloth just went through modern DNA testing, and the results made the mystery worse. A lab pulled genetic material off the 2,000-year-old linen and found traces from at least 14 different people, and still couldn't name a single one of them. The man who photographed the shroud in 1978, Barrie Schwortz, went in expecting to prove it was fake. Nearly 50 years later, nobody has, including him, and one of those genetic traces matched someone connected to the investigation itself. A match that only became possible once researchers had his modern DNA to compare against. These are the new DNA results, and what they found on the Shroud of Turin should not be possible. Who is Barrie Schwortz? To understand why those DNA results carry weight, you first have to understand the man whose name is on this story. Because the most credible witness the Shroud has ever had is the one person who had every reason to walk away from it. Barrie Schwortz was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home. By the time he got the call in 1978, he described himself as a non-practicing Jew with no particular interest in Christian relics. He started out as a working photographer, not a religious scholar. He graduated from Brooks Institute of Photography in 1971 and spent the next 15 years running an award-winning commercial studio, shooting product, food, and technical work. In May of 1978, months before Turin, he founded his own video production company. His resume was built on technical skill, and that skill was what got him noticed. That year, a team of scientists organized the Shroud of Turin research project, the first group ever given direct scientific access to examine the cloth many believe wrapped the body of Jesus after the crucifixion. Schwartz was recruited as the team's official documenting photographer. He assumed the job would be short. Many people at the time believed the cloth was a medieval painting made to look like a burial shroud, and he expected the team would simply confirm that and move on. Before the work even began, he found himself questioning why he was there at all. He later admitted he wondered whether someone raised Orthodox Jewish belonged on a project built around what was, by his own understanding, the most significant relic in Christianity. The answer came from a colleague. Don Lin, an imaging specialist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, reminded him of something simple. Jesus himself was Jewish, so there was nothing out of place about a Jewish photographer documenting his shroud. Lin's advice was direct. Go to Turin, do the job as well as it could be done, and worry about the why later. Schwartz took that advice and, by his own account, never regretted it. Between October 8th and October 14th, 1978, the team spent 120 hours with the shroud. Schwartz stayed for all of it, and by his own account, it wasn't faith that changed his mind over those 5 days. It was the data. What that data showed is where the real investigation starts. The 1978 investigation, the team Schwartz joined, did not start in Turin. It started 2 years earlier, in February of 1976, when physicist John Jackson brought a photograph of the cloth to a colleague working with a device called a VP8 image analyzer, a tool built to convert image density into three-dimensional relief.
50 years since, no image, painted, photographed, digitally generated, has ever reproduced this result. Not one. Only about 60 VP8 units were ever built. Only 2 still work. And the question remains, how do you encode distance information into fabric without any technology that—
When they ran the shroud's image through it, something appeared that a flat photograph should never produce. The image held spatial depth, as though it had been formed by actual distance from a body, not by light and shadow, the way a painting or a photograph would be. That result was the reason a team came together at all. Word of the discovery reached Don Devon, the same colleague who would later bring Schwartz in, and from there, the project began pulling in specialists from across the country. Over the next year and a half, the team assembled in pieces, communicating by phone and mail, working in small regional groups scattered across the country. They met in full only once before leaving for Italy, at a rehearsal in Connecticut. where they tested their instruments on a replica of the cloth. The final plan ran to 65 pages, built around a single 96-hour window, and required approval from the Shroud's owner before anyone could touch the real thing. The trip nearly didn't happen. The night before departure, Pope John Paul I died suddenly in Rome, and the team spent the night on the phone deciding whether to go anyway. They left the next morning. In Turin, Customs seized all 80 crates of their equipment over a radiation warning sticker on the X-ray gear, and it took 5 days and a personal visit from a priest connected to the Shroud's guardians to get it released. What remained was a day and a half to get 18 months of planning ready to run. The window Schwartz had already spent inside the examination room was where that planning became action. Photography under ultraviolet and infrared light, X-ray radiography, photomicroscopy at up to 64 times magnification, sticky tape sampling engineered by 3M to lift surface material without leaving residue. A researcher unstitched a section of the backing cloth to see the reverse side of the shroud for the first time in roughly 450 years. What the team did not find mattered as much as what they did. Under magnification, there was no pigment and no trace of a brushstroke anywhere on the cloth. The blood testing came back positive for 2 components of real human blood: hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in red blood cells, and serum albumin, a protein found in blood plasma. Their final published conclusion in 1981 did not claim a resolved mystery. It stated plainly that the image was that of a real, crucified human form, that it was not the product of an artist, and that how it was produced remained, in their own words, unsolved. That unresolved status is where the DNA story would eventually pick up. The carbon dating controversy. In October of 1988, 3 laboratories in Oxford, Arizona and Zurich each tested a fragment cut directly from the shroud, using radiocarbon dating, a method that measures a radioactive form of carbon absorbed by living things and lost at a known rate after death. Applied to old organic material like linen, it can estimate how long ago the material was made.
8 radiocarbon laboratories: the University of Arizona, the University of Oxford, and ETH Zurich, each received samples cut from the shroud on April 21. The test was supposed to end the debate forever. The results: 1260 to 1390 CE.
The 3 labs announced their results at press conferences held the same day in Turin and London. Their combined finding placed the cloth's origin between 1260 and 1390 AD, a result widely reported at the time as settling the authenticity question in favor of a medieval origin. The sample came from a single site, a corner of the cloth cut in April of that year and divided into pieces for the 3 labs. That single site approach is where the first doubts took root. Chemist Raymond Rogers, a member of the original 1978 STURP team, argued in 2005 that this specific corner showed signs of being a repair, rewoven sometime after the cloth's earliest documented history, not part of the original weave. That claim remains genuinely disputed within the field. It has never been broadly accepted as settled, and no further destructive testing has been permitted to confirm or rule it out either way. But the repair theory wasn't the only problem the dating ran into. 2 more surfaced years apart, and neither had anything to do with repairs. The first came in 2010, when statisticians ran a more rigorous analysis on the results the 3 labs had already published. They found something the original 1988 report never disclosed. One of Arizona's 2 samples had apparently never been dated at all, despite the published paper implying all pieces were tested. The second confirmation came 7 years later. In 2017, a Freedom of Information request in the United Kingdom forced the British Museum to release the raw data behind the test. Data the 3 laboratories had never made public. That raw data confirmed the 2010 finding and added more. Zurich had actually run 10 measurements, not the number stated in the original paper, and Arizona had split its sample into more pieces than disclosed. More significant than the missing measurements was what the numbers themselves showed. Age estimates from different points along that single sample varied in a consistent pattern, growing older or younger, depending on their exact position on the strip. If the sample had been uniform in age, that pattern should not exist. Statisticians who reviewed the raw data concluded the sample could not be treated as one representative piece of the whole cloth, and that the confidence claimed in 1988 does not hold up under modern review. None of this proves the cloth is older or younger than the 1988 results suggested. The researchers behind that later analysis were careful to say so themselves. Their conclusion did not argue for a first-century origin. It argued that the question remains genuinely open. The dating the cloth correctly would require a very different approach than the one used in 1988. Whether that new approach will ever happen is its own question. What's certain is that the radiocarbon result most people know, the one from 1988, was never as settled as it was made to sound. With the cloth's age still unresolved by chemistry, researchers turned to a different kind of evidence entirely. One buried not in the fibers themselves, but in whatever the fibers had absorbed over the centuries. The new DNA study, every human cell, carries two kinds of genetic material worth knowing apart here. Nuclear DNA sits in the cell's nucleus, inherited from both parents, and it's what most people picture when they hear the word DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is different. It exists in much higher copy numbers per cell, which makes it easier to recover from old or damaged samples, and it passes down only from the mother, unchanged for generations unless a mutation occurs along the way.
In 2015, geneticist Gianni Barcaccia published a study in Nature Scientific Reports. His team extracted dust from deep within the shroud's weave and sequenced the mitochondrial DNA.
That second kind, mitochondrial DNA, is what researchers turned to when they went looking for answers in the shroud's fibers. In 2026, a team of geneticists returned to 12 samples originally collected from the shroud back in 1978, decades before this new sequencing technology existed. 7 of those 12 samples yielded usable genetic material. That in itself was notable. DNA this old, sitting on cloth handled by countless people over centuries, is not something researchers expected to recover cleanly, if at all. What they found inside those 7 samples was human mitochondrial DNA, matching a specific genetic marker called K1A1B1A. A marker like this is a kind of inherited signature, a small set of mutations passed down the maternal line that lets researchers trace which broad population group. When they compared this particular marker against a modern reference sample, it matched the mitogenome of Professor Pierluigi Baima Bollone, the very man who collected the original samples back in 1978. Baima Bollone died on November 5, 2025, only months before the paper's publication. The study is dedicated to his memory. The man who first touched these threads to gather the sample that would one day be sequenced did not live to see what his own collection revealed. And what it revealed, in part, was him. That finding wasn't a disappointment. It was expected, and it was useful. It confirmed the sequencing method worked, and it gave researchers a clear baseline to separate the collector's own genetic trace from anything else present in the sample.
Happened. Genetic fingerprints from across the world. Haplogroup H33 found almost exclusively among the Druze.
Beyond that baseline, 3 additional genetic markers turned up across the same samples. One, called H2A2, is so common in reference sequencing that its presence alone doesn't point to any specific population. Another, H1B, is found widely across Western Eurasia. The third, H33, is rarer, and today it shows up mainly among Near Eastern populations, including the Druze community of the Levant. Taken together with earlier research, the picture that emerges is not one person's genetic signature. It traces from at least 14 different individuals, accumulated across centuries of contact with the cloth. But the human material wasn't the only thing living in those fibers. the non-human material told its own story. Researchers found DNA from carrots, wheat, bananas, and peanuts among the plant traces, and from cattle, pigs, cats, and dogs among the animal traces. They also found genetic material from Mediterranean red coral, along with bacteria commonly found on human skin and microbes adapted to high salt environments, the kind associated with long-term textile storage. That environmental picture gave researchers a reason to look beyond DNA entirely, toward a more direct kind of dating. Two threads pulled specifically from the cloth's reliquary, its protective container, were intact enough for radiocarbon testing. Their dates lined up with two well-documented moments in the shroud's history: a repair carried out in 1534 after fire damage, and a second conservation effort in 1694. The study's own authors were careful about what all of this does and doesn't prove. Their conclusion was direct. The DNA and metagenomic data cannot establish whether the cloth originated in the medieval period or 2,000 years earlier. What the data does establish is contact, centuries of it, from a wide range of sources, none of which point to a single verified original source. The age of the shroud remained exactly where it stood before the study began, undetermined. What the study does and doesn't show contact from centuries of hands doesn't explain everything currently attached to the shroud's name. Some of what's circulating right now isn't from the 2026 study at all.
The image exists only on the topmost 200 nanometers of the linen fibers, thinner than a bacterium. It's a chemical change, oxidation and dehydration of the cellulose in the fiber's outermost layer.
One finding connected to the shroud has been circulating widely under headlines suggesting an entirely new discovery: that the cloth's linen may trace back to India. That claim is real, but it doesn't come from the 2026 study. It comes from an earlier paper, published in 2015 by a different research team led by Gianni Barcaccia, working with a separate set of samples. That 2015 study found something striking in its own right. Over 55% of the human DNA reads it identified traced to Near Eastern lineages, fewer than 6% traced to Western Europe, and just under 39% traced to Indian lineages, a result the researchers tied to speculation about ancient trade routes, specifically the possibility that linen or yarn used in the cloth's production originated somewhere near the Indus Valley region. That finding made headlines of its own back in 2015 and never fully faded from shroud coverage, which is likely why some recent reporting on the 2026 paper folded the old number back in as though it were part of the new result. Correctly, but it doesn't reproduce it. None of the haplogroups identified in the newer research include any South Asian markers. The two studies, run nearly a decade apart on different samples, simply found different things, and the honest way to tell this story is to keep them separate on screen rather than let a 9-year-old number pass as this year's discovery. But mixed-up timelines aren't the only distortion attached to this research. A second category of claims deserves the same scrutiny, and it comes from a different direction entirely. Language describing the shroud's image as scientifically impossible, or treating any of this DNA work as proof of the resurrection, isn't something either paper says. It comes from religious commentary and advocacy writing built around these findings after the fact. Neither the 2015 nor the 2026 paper makes any claim about the cloth's religious authenticity, one way or the other. That's worth sitting with for a moment, because once DNA data and belief claims start blending together on screen, a viewer loses the ability to tell which parts were measured and which parts were interpreted for them. The unresolved mystery. 3 separate eras of technology have now been pointed at this cloth, and each one answered a different question than the one before it. The 1978 team had chemistry and optics. They could rule out pigment and brush strokes, but they could not explain what had replaced them. The 1988 team had radiocarbon dating, a method built to close the authenticity question outright. Instead, the raw data it left behind, unreleased for nearly 30 years, undermined its own result. The 2026 team had genetic sequencing, a tool none of the earlier researchers had access to. It confirmed the cloth had been touched by at least 14 people across centuries, and it still could not assign the cloth an age. If the shroud were a straightforward forgery, at least one of these tests should have confirmed it cleanly. If it were what millions believe it is, at least one of these tests should have moved the needle firmly in that direction. Neither happened. Schwartz's own account of this hasn't changed across 4 decades of new findings. The science stops at unexplained. It does not cross into proof in either direction, no matter which lab runs the next test. That's the actual state of the evidence as of 2026. Contact confirmed, origin undetermined. 48 years of testing has done nothing to close this case. The Shroud of Turin remains exactly where it started, unexplained. If you want to watch more videos like this, please like, subscribe, and press the notification bell.